The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the golden gates. Among the crowd stood 8-year-old Princess Charlotte, dressed in a simple blue coat and matching hat, holding her nanny's hand. It was one of those rare moments when she was allowed to watch the changing of the guard ceremony from outside the palace walls, experiencing it as ordinary people did. Charlotte loved these small adventures. Her parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, believed their children should understand the world beyond palace gates. Today, Maria, her trusted nanny, had brought her to see the ceremony from a different perspective. They stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, and Charlotte's eyes sparkled with excitement as the guards marched in perfect formation. The crowd pressed closer as the ceremony began. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders for a better view. Cameras clicked constantly. The iconic red-coated guards stood motionless at their posts, their tall bearskin hats making them appear even more imposing. Charlotte watched in fascination, knowing that these soldiers took their duty seriously. She had learned about their role in protecting the royal family and understood the dedication required to stand so still for hours. Near the front of the crowd, a boy around 10 years old pushed his way forward. His mother trailed behind, barely paying attention as she scrolled through her phone. The boy wore expensive sneakers and a designer jacket, and his face showed clear irritation at having to wait with everyone else. He had been complaining loudly for the past 10 minutes about being bored and wanting to leave. Charlotte noticed him because his voice carried over the respectful murmurs of the other visitors. Most people maintained a quiet reverence during the ceremony, understanding they were witnessing a tradition that stretched back centuries. But this boy seemed determined to disrupt the peaceful atmosphere. He kicked at the metal barrier separating the crowd from the guards, making it rattle. His mother glanced up briefly from her phone, said something that sounded like a half-hearted "stop that," then returned to her scrolling. The boy smirked, clearly emboldened by the lack of consequences. Other tourists began to notice, exchanging uncomfortable glances. A few parents pulled their own children back, not wanting them near the disruptive behavior. The boy's attention fixed on one particular guard stationed directly in front of him. The soldier stood perfectly still, eyes forward, rifle at his side, embodying the discipline and professionalism the Queen's Guard was known for. His face showed no emotion, no acknowledgement of the crowd, nothing that would break his professional bearing. To the boy, this seemed like a challenge. Charlotte felt Maria's hand tighten slightly on hers. Her nanny had noticed the situation developing too. They watched as the boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a granola bar. He unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving the guard. Then he did something that made several people in the crowd gasp. He threw the wrapper directly at the guard's feet. The wrapper landed on the soldier's polished black boot. The guard didn't move. He didn't even blink. His training had prepared him for far worse distractions than a piece of trash. But the crowd had seen it happen, and disapproval rippled through the gathering. A few people called out softly for the boy to stop, but he ignored them completely. Encouraged by the reaction he was getting, the boy stepped closer to the barrier. He began making faces at the guard, waving his hands, trying desperately to get any kind of response. His mother, still engrossed in her phone, remained oblivious to her son's escalating behavior. Other tourists started recording on their phones, though whether they were documenting the ceremony or the disruption was unclear. Charlotte watched with growing concern. She knew these guards were trained soldiers, not tourist attractions. They deserved respect. Her great-grandmother had often spoken about the important role the guards played, not just in ceremony but in actual security. These men and women were serving their country, and this boy was treating the guard like a prop for his entertainment. The situation grew worse. The boy found a pebble on the ground and picked it up. He tossed it from hand to hand, grinning at the guard. Several adults near him told him to stop, their voices firmer now. One elderly gentleman even reached out to tap the mother's shoulder, trying to get her attention. She waved him off dismissively, barely looking up from her screen. Charlotte felt her heart racing. She had been taught that with privilege came responsibility. She was a princess, but more importantly, she was a person who could speak up when something was wrong. Maria must have sensed her charge's thoughts because she leaned down and whispered, "Sometimes we must stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult." The boy raised his arm. preparing to throw the pebble at the guard. The crowd held its collective breath. This had gone too far beyond childish mischief. This was becoming an actual assault on a soldier performing his duty. Charlotte's mind raced. She thought about her father teaching her about courage, her mother showing her the importance of compassion, and her great-grandmother's lessons about duty and service. Before she could second-guess herself, Charlotte released Maria's hand and stepped forward. Her small voice cut through the tension with surprising clarity. She didn't shout or demand attention. She simply spoke with the calm authority that came from her upbringing and her genuine concern for the right thing being done. The boy's arm remained raised, the pebble still in his hand. He turned to see who had spoken, annoyed at the interruption to his game. His eyes fell on a small girl in a blue coat, her expression serious and her posture straight. She looked directly at him, unafraid and unwavering. Something about her presence made him pause, though he didn't yet realize who she was. Other tourists turned to look at the girl who had spoken up. A few recognized her immediately, their eyes widening in surprise. Camera phones that had been recording the boy's misbehavior now turned toward Charlotte. Maria remained close but allowed her young charge to handle the situation, ready to step in if needed but respecting Charlotte's decision to act. The moment stretched out, silent and heavy with anticipation. The guard remained motionless, though those close enough might have noticed the slightest shift in his expression. The ceremony continued around them, but this small drama at the barrier had captured everyone's attention. What would happen next would be talked about for weeks to come, shared on social media, and debated in households across the country. Charlotte stood her ground, her blue eyes serious, her small frame somehow commanding respect from the crowd around her. She had grown up in the spotlight, but this was different. This wasn't a planned appearance or a photo opportunity. This was a real moment requiring real courage, and she had chosen to step forward when she saw someone being treated unfairly. The outcome of her action remained uncertain, hanging in the balance like the pebble still clutched in the rude boy's hand. Charlotte's words hung in the air as the boy stared at her, confusion crossing his face. He hadn't expected anyone to challenge him, especially not someone younger and smaller than himself. The pebble remained in his raised hand, but his confidence had faltered. Around them, the crowd had gone completely silent, waiting to see what would happen next. The young princess took another small step forward, her voice steady and clear despite the butterflies in her stomach. She explained to the boy that the guard was a real soldier, not a statue or a toy for entertainment. These men and women protected the country and the royal family, standing for hours in all weather, maintaining tradition and security. They deserved respect, not harassment. Her words were simple but powerful. She didn't speak down to the boy or act superior. She spoke to him as one child to another, explaining something important that he clearly didn't understand. The way she expressed herself showed wisdom beyond her years, a result of careful education and the example set by her parents about treating everyone with dignity. The boy lowered his arm slowly, the pebble dropping from his fingers to the ground. His face flushed red, though whether from embarrassment or anger was hard to tell. He looked around at the crowd, suddenly aware that dozens of people were watching him, many with disapproval written clearly on their faces. His mother had finally looked up from her phone, confused about why everyone was staring in their direction. Charlotte continued speaking, her tone gentle but firm. She told the boy that if he was bored, there were many interesting things to learn about the ceremony. She pointed out the precision of the guards' movements, the history behind their uniforms, the meaning of the different parts of the ritual. She transformed what the boy had seen as a tedious obligation into something potentially fascinating. Several tourists near them nodded in agreement. A few smiled at Charlotte's composure and kindness. One elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, moved by the young girl's courage and grace. The guard, still maintaining his position, seemed to stand even straighter, though his expression remained professional and unchanged. The boy's mother finally pushed her way through the small crowd that had formed, her phone now forgotten in her pocket. She demanded to know what was happening and why everyone was staring at her son. Her tone was defensive and aggressive, ready to protect her child from what she assumed was unfair criticism. She hadn't witnessed his behavior and was prepared to fight against any accusations. Maria stepped forward then, positioning herself beside Charlotte. She calmly explained to the mother what had occurred, detailing the escalating behavior that had disturbed the ceremony and disrespected the guard. Other tourists chimed in, confirming the account. The mother's defensive expression slowly changed as she realized her son had indeed been in the wrong. Charlotte watched as the woman's face went through several emotions: denial, embarrassment, anger, and finally something that might have been shame. The boy stood beside his mother, looking at his expensive shoes, no longer the bold troublemaker he had been moments before. The crowd waited, curious about how this situation would resolve itself. The mother opened her mouth several times, seeming to struggle with what to say. She glanced at Charlotte, then at her son, then at the stoic guard who had endured the harassment without complaint. Finally, she managed to ask her son if what these people were saying was true. The boy nodded slightly, still not meeting anyone's eyes. What happened next surprised everyone. The mother took a deep breath and did something that couldn't have been easy for her. She approached the barrier and addressed the guard directly, even though she knew he wouldn't respond. She apologized for her son's behavior. Her voice shaking slightly, she admitted she hadn't been paying attention and took responsibility for not teaching her son proper respect. Then she turned to Charlotte, and as she looked more closely at the girl in the blue coat, recognition dawned on her face. Her eyes widened and she seemed to struggle between wanting to curtsy and wanting to sink into the ground from embarrassment. She had just had her parenting criticized in public, and the person who had done it, quite rightly, was a member of the royal family. Charlotte handled the moment with remarkable grace. She smiled at the woman and told her that everyone makes mistakes and what matters is learning from them. She suggested that perhaps the boy didn't understand the significance of the ceremony because no one had explained it to him properly. Her words offered the mother and son a path forward, a way to turn this embarrassing moment into a learning experience. The boy finally looked up at Charlotte. Something in her kindness, despite his terrible behavior, seemed to affect him deeply. He stepped forward and, in a quiet voice that only those nearby could hear, apologized directly to the guard. The soldier, of course, didn't respond verbally, but something in his bearing suggested acknowledgement, a subtle humanity beneath the professional facade. Charlotte encouraged the boy to pick up the wrapper he had thrown and to learn more about the guards and their important role. She explained that understanding why traditions matter makes them much more interesting. The boy nodded and retrieved the trash, holding it tightly in his hand as if afraid to let it fall again. Around them, the crowd had softened. What had started as a tense confrontation had transformed into something else entirely, a teaching moment, an example of grace under pressure, a demonstration of how dignity and kindness could change a situation. People began taking photos again, but now they were capturing Charlotte's gentle interaction with the boy rather than documenting his misbehavior. An elderly man in the crowd, who wore a badge identifying him as a military veteran, approached the group. He thanked Charlotte for standing up for the guard and offered to explain some of the history and significance of the ceremony to the boy, if he was interested. The boy, seeming genuinely remorseful now, nodded eagerly, grateful for a chance to prove he wasn't just a troublemaker. The veteran began sharing stories about the guards' training, the history of their uniforms, and the discipline required for their role. The boy listened with growing interest, asking questions and showing a curiosity that had been completely absent during his earlier behavior. His mother stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, looking between Charlotte and her son with a complex expression. Maria touched Charlotte's shoulder gently, and they moved back into the crowd, allowing the moment to continue without the princess at its center. Charlotte had done what she felt was right, and now it was time to let others take over. They found a spot where they could continue watching the ceremony without drawing more attention. As the changing of the guard proceeded, Charlotte noticed the boy standing straighter, watching the soldiers with new respect. He was asking the veteran questions and actually listening to the answers. His mother had put her phone away completely and was engaged in the conversation, learning alongside her son. It was a small transformation, but a meaningful one. The incident had rippled through the crowd. People who had witnessed it were talking quietly about what they had seen. Many were impressed by Charlotte's courage and composure. Others discussed the importance of teaching children respect and the consequences of distracted parenting. Some simply marveled at how a child had handled a difficult situation with more grace than many adults could manage. Charlotte felt Maria squeeze her hand gently, a silent communication of pride and support. The young princess watched the ceremony continue, her heart gradually slowing from its racing pace. She had been nervous, even afraid, but she had done what felt right. Her great-grandmother's words echoed in her mind about duty, service, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The guard who had been the target of the harassment maintained his post perfectly, showing no sign that anything unusual had occurred. But as the ceremony concluded and the guards began their synchronized march, Charlotte thought she saw the slightest nod in her direction from that particular soldier. It was so subtle that she couldn't be certain it had happened, but the possibility made her smile. The crowd began to disperse as the ceremony ended. The boy and his mother approached Charlotte once more before leaving. The mother expressed genuine gratitude for the lesson her son had learned, admitting that she needed to put her phone down more often and pay better attention. The boy shook Charlotte's hand solemnly and promised to always treat guards with respect from now on. As they walked away, Charlotte overheard the boy telling his mother excitedly about everything he had learned from the veteran. He wanted to research more about the guards when they got home, maybe even write about it for his school project. His mother agreed, seeming pleased by his newfound enthusiasm. What had started as the worst kind of tourist behavior had ended with genuine interest and respect. The story of what happened at the palace gates spread quickly through social media. Several tourists had recorded the incident on their phones, and within hours, videos were circulating across multiple platforms. People around the world watched as a young girl in a blue coat calmly confronted a rude child and transformed a tense situation into a teaching moment through kindness and wisdom. At first, most viewers didn't realize who the girl was. They simply saw a brave child standing up for a guard who couldn't defend himself. Comments poured in praising her composure, her articulate explanation, and her gentle approach to correcting the boy's behavior. Parents shared the videos with their children as an example of good citizenship and standing up for what's right. Then someone enhanced a portion of the video, zooming in on the girl's face, and the revelation spread like wildfire. Princess Charlotte had been there among the regular crowd, and she had stepped forward to defend a royal guard. The story took on new dimensions as people realized a member of the royal family had advocated for one of the soldiers who protected her family. News outlets around the world picked up the story. Headlines praised Charlotte's actions while respecting her privacy by not being overly intrusive. Commentators discussed what the incident revealed about how the young royals were being raised. Many pointed to the influence of her parents, who had always emphasized the importance of humility, service, and treating everyone with respect regardless of their position. Royal watchers noted that this wasn't entirely surprising given Charlotte's upbringing. Her parents had made deliberate choices to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, while preparing them for their future roles. They took their children to regular schools, involved them in charitable work appropriate for their ages, and taught them that being royal was about service, not superiority. The guard who had been the target of the harassment was eventually identified, though military officials declined to provide his name to protect his privacy. In a brief statement, a spokesperson for the Queen's Guard expressed appreciation for Princess Charlotte's actions and noted that such incidents, while rare, do occur, and the guards are trained to maintain their composure regardless of distractions or provocations. The boy's mother also released a statement through social media, taking full responsibility for not supervising her son properly. She thanked Princess Charlotte for the lesson both she and her son had learned, admitting she had been too absorbed in her phone to notice her son's escalating behavior. She encouraged other parents to be more present and attentive, using her mistake as a cautionary example. Her honesty and accountability resonated with many people. Parents admitted they too had been guilty of distracted supervision, and the incident sparked broader conversations about phone use, teaching children respect, and the importance of understanding the significance of cultural and national traditions. The veteran who had taken the time to educate the boy after the incident was tracked down by a reporter. He gave an interview praising Charlotte's courage and explaining why he felt compelled to help. He said that seeing a child stand up for a soldier touched his heart, and he wanted to ensure the boy understood why respect for those in service was so important. The reporter noted that the veteran's eyes misted over when discussing the incident. Back at the palace, Charlotte's parents were made aware of the situation through their security team. Video footage was reviewed to ensure Charlotte's safety hadn't been compromised, but the incident had been peaceful and positive. Her father, the Prince of Wales, was reportedly very proud of how his daughter had handled herself, while her mother praised Charlotte's compassion in giving the boy a chance to learn, rather than simply condemning his behavior. Charlotte's siblings, Prince George and Prince Louis, heard about the incident too. George, being older, understood the significance and teased his sister gently about being famous, though he admitted he was impressed by her bravery. Louis, younger and less aware of the implications, simply thought it was cool that his sister had been in videos that people around the world were watching. At school the next day, Charlotte found herself the center of attention, though her teachers and school administrators handled it carefully to prevent it from becoming overwhelming. Her classmates had questions, but the staff ensured that Charlotte wasn't made to feel too different from the other children. Her friends were excited and proud, but they were also reminded that Charlotte was still just their classmate and friend. During lunch, Charlotte sat with her usual group of friends and they asked her what it had been like. She told them honestly that she had been scared but knew she needed to do something. She explained that seeing someone be mean to the guard had made her upset because she knew those soldiers worked hard and deserved respect. Her friends listened with admiration, and one girl said she hoped she would be that brave if something similar happened around her. The incident also reached Charlotte's great-grandmother, the Queen, who had long been concerned about how the younger generation of royals would handle public attention and responsibility. According to palace insiders, she was deeply moved by Charlotte's actions and saw in them a continuation of the values of duty and service that had defined her own long reign. She reportedly sent a private note to Charlotte, praising her courage and kindness. Educational institutions began using the incident as a teaching tool. Videos of Charlotte's interaction with the boy were shown in classrooms as examples of conflict resolution, respectful communication, and civic responsibility. Teachers facilitated discussions about standing up for others, understanding different perspectives, and the importance of national traditions and the people who maintain them. Child psychology experts weighed in on the incident, analyzing what made Charlotte's approach so effective. They noted her calm demeanor, her age-appropriate language, her focus on education rather than punishment, and her empathy for both the guard and the boy. Several pointed out that she had demonstrated emotional intelligence that many adults struggle to achieve. The military community embraced the story enthusiastically. Current and former service members shared the videos widely, expressing gratitude that a member of the royal family had stood up for one of their own. Many noted that guards at ceremonial posts face various forms of disrespect from tourists who don't understand or value their role, and Charlotte's actions highlighted the real people behind the uniforms. Tourism officials at royal sites reported an interesting side effect of the incident. More visitors were approaching guards respectfully, thanking them for their service and showing genuine interest in learning about their role. The incident had apparently reminded people that these weren't just living statues for photo opportunities, but trained soldiers performing an important duty. The boy from the incident had his own journey of transformation. According to his mother's updates on social media, he had become fascinated with military history and the Royal Guards specifically. He had researched their training, their history, and their role in national security. He created a school presentation about what he had learned and spoke about his own experience as a lesson in respecting others and learning from mistakes. Some media outlets tried to paint the incident as controversial, suggesting Charlotte had been inappropriately exposed to confrontation or that her security should have intervened sooner. However, these narratives found little traction. Most people recognized that Charlotte had been safe, that Maria had been right there, and that the experience had been valuable for everyone involved. Royal commentators discussed how the incident reflected changing times. Unlike previous generations where royals were carefully shielded from any public spontaneity, Charlotte's parents had allowed her to have a genuine moment of agency. This approach was seen as preparing her and her siblings for their future roles in a more engaged and personal way than traditional royal upbringing might have allowed. The incident also sparked discussions about the relevance of the monarchy in modern times. Some Republicans who typically criticized the royal family found themselves admiring Charlotte's actions, while staunch monarchists pointed to the incident as proof that the younger generation understood their role as servants of the people, not just privileged individuals. International media coverage was extensive. American news outlets compared Charlotte's comportment favorably to that of many adults in public life. European royal watchers discussed how different royal families approached raising children in the public eye. Asian and African media highlighted the universal themes of respect, courage, and kindness that transcended cultural boundaries. Social media users created artwork inspired by the incident, depicting Charlotte as various heroic figures or creating uplifting graphics with quotes from her words to the boy. While some of this attention made palace officials uncomfortable, they recognized that it was genuinely positive and celebrated values they wanted to promote. Charlotte herself seemed to handle the attention with the same grace she had shown during the incident. When photographers captured her arriving at school or attending events with her family in the days following, she appeared unfazed by the increased interest. She waved to well-wishers naturally and continued with her regular activities without a parent. 3 weeks after the incident, an unexpected letter arrived at Kensington Palace. It was addressed to Princess Charlotte and came from the guard who had been at the center of that day's events. The letter had been reviewed by security before being passed along, and when Charlotte's parents gave it to her, they explained that the guard had requested permission to write, which had been granted given the unique circumstances. Charlotte opened the letter carefully, her fingers trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and excitement. The guard, Sergeant James Mitchell, had written in neat, formal handwriting. He thanked her for standing up for him and explained that, while guards are trained to ignore distractions, it had meant more than she could know to have someone defend him, especially someone so young who could have easily stayed silent. He went on to describe his years of service and why being a Queen's Guard meant so much to him. His grandfather had served in the same position decades earlier, and following in those footsteps had been a dream of his since childhood. He explained that standing at those posts wasn't just ceremony but an honor, a connection to history and a real security responsibility that he and his fellow guards took seriously. The letter concluded with Sergeant Mitchell expressing hope that Charlotte would continue to stand up for what was right throughout her life. He wrote that courage and kindness, especially when combined, were rare and precious qualities. He thanked her parents for raising a daughter who understood that privilege came with responsibility, and that no one was too important to speak up for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Charlotte read the letter 3 times. Then she asked her mother if she could write back. Her parents discussed it and decided that, under supervised circumstances, it would be appropriate. Charlotte spent the evening crafting her response, writing several drafts until she felt she had expressed herself properly. She thanked Sergeant Mitchell for his service and for taking the time to write to her. In her letter, Charlotte admitted she had been scared to speak up, but had remembered her great-grandmother's words about duty and doing what was right even when it was difficult. She asked questions about his training and his grandfather's service, showing genuine interest in his experiences. She signed the letter simply Charlotte and drew a small picture of a guard in his distinctive uniform at the bottom of the page. The correspondence was handled through official channels but was kept private out of respect for both Charlotte and Sergeant Mitchell. However, the fact that a connection had been made between them became known to palace staff, and it reinforced the positive feelings about how the incident had been handled and what it represented, about the values being instilled in the young royals. Around the same time, the boy from the incident, whose name was Oliver, had written his own letter. It arrived at the palace through different channels, having been sent to the General Correspondence Office. In it, Oliver explained how much his life had changed since that day. He wrote about everything he had learned about the royal guards, about military service, and about treating people with respect. Oliver's letter was touching in its honesty. He admitted he had been acting out because he was bored and wanted attention, not really thinking about the guard as a real person. He thanked Charlotte for making him realize that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their job or position. He mentioned that he had joined a youth group focused on community service and was working on becoming a better person. Charlotte's parents read Oliver's letter to her, and she was genuinely happy to hear that he had taken the lesson to heart. She asked if she could send him a reply too. Her parents agreed, and Charlotte wrote a warm response encouraging Oliver in his journey and praising him for his willingness to learn and change. She suggested that making mistakes wasn't what defined a person, but how they responded to those mistakes was what mattered. The exchange of letters led to an unexpected development. Oliver's school had been planning a project about British traditions and had decided to focus on the royal guards after Oliver's transformation. The teacher leading the project reached out to the palace to see if there might be any educational materials they could use. The inquiry eventually led to a proposal for a small educational session. After careful consideration and planning, it was arranged for a group of students from Oliver's school, including Oliver himself, to visit a military facility where guards trained. It wouldn't involve Charlotte directly, respecting her privacy and normal routine, but it was seen as a positive outcome from the incident. Sergeant Mitchell volunteered to be part of the educational presentation, creating a full circle moment. The school visit was carefully organized to be educational rather than promotional. Students learned about military discipline, the history of the Queen's Guard, the training required, and the actual security functions these ceremonial posts served. Oliver was attentive throughout, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. His transformation from that rude child at the palace gates was remarkable to witness. Sergeant Mitchell spoke to the group about his experiences, and when he mentioned the incident at the palace, he didn't identify Oliver, but spoke generally about how tourists sometimes didn't realize guards were real soldiers with feelings and families. Oliver listened with visible emotion, understanding that he had been one of those thoughtless tourists. After the presentation, he approached the sergeant privately to apologize in person. The sergeant's response was gracious. He told Oliver that recognizing mistakes and working to do better was the mark of good character. He shared that he had made plenty of mistakes in his own youth and that what mattered was learning from them. The conversation was brief but meaningful, and Oliver left with even more determination to live up to the second chance he felt he had been given. Meanwhile, Charlotte's actions continued to have ripples in unexpected places. A children's book author was inspired by the incident and wrote a story about courage, kindness, and standing up for others, loosely based on what had happened but fictionalized to protect everyone's privacy. The book became popular in schools as a tool for teaching character education and conflict resolution. Youth organizations reported increases in membership as parents sought to instill the kind of values Charlotte had demonstrated. Programs focusing on civic responsibility, respect for service members, and community engagement saw renewed interest. Teachers incorporated discussions about the incident into lessons about citizenship, empathy, and moral courage. Charlotte herself remained largely unaware of the full extent of her influence. Her parents deliberately shielded her from excessive attention, wanting her to understand that she had done a good thing without becoming self-important about it. They emphasized that what she had done was simply the right thing, not something that made her special or deserving of excessive praise. At family gatherings, Charlotte's grandparents on both sides expressed pride in her actions. Her grandfather, King Charles, had a long conversation with her about the responsibilities of their position and how important it was to use any platform or influence for good. He shared stories of times he had stood up for causes or people, reinforcing that their role was about service. Charlotte's grandmother on her mother's side, Carol Middleton, approached it from a different angle. She talked to Charlotte about how regular people see the royal family and how important it was that Charlotte had shown she was a normal girl who cared about fairness and kindness. She emphasized that titles and positions didn't make someone better than others, just differently positioned to help. The incident also strengthened Charlotte's relationship with her siblings. George, who would one day be king, learned from his sister's example about the importance of speaking up when witnessing injustice. Louis, younger and more impulsive, was taught by his parents to think about what Charlotte had done and why it mattered. The three siblings had always been close, but the incident gave them a shared reference point for family values. At school, Charlotte's teachers noticed subtle changes in her confidence. She had always been a good student, but she seemed more willing to voice her opinions in class discussions and more likely to stand up for classmates who were being treated unfairly. The experience had empowered her in ways that extended beyond that single moment at the palace gates. Her classmates also seemed affected. Several children mentioned wanting to be more like Charlotte when they grew up, not because she was a princess, but because she had been brave and kind. Teachers reported fewer incidents of bullying, and more examples of students standing up for each other. While it was impossible to attribute all of this directly to Charlotte's influence, her example had clearly made an impact. The media eventually moved on to other stories, as media always does, but the incident remained a defining moment in Charlotte's young life. It was referenced in documentaries about the royal family, included in articles about raising children with strong values, and became part of the narrative about her generation of royals being different from previous ones. Sergeant Mitchell continued his service, and while he never sought attention for his role in the incident, his fellow guards treated him with a special respect. He had been the catalyst for a moment that had reminded people why their service mattered. His command. 6 months after the incident, Remembrance Day arrived, a solemn occasion when the nation honored those who had served and sacrificed in military service. Charlotte attended the ceremony with her family, as she had in previous years, but this time she understood the significance in a deeper way. She had come to know, at least through letters, someone who currently served, and that personal connection made the ceremony more meaningful. As she stood with her family during the 2-minute silence, Charlotte thought about Sergeant Mitchell and all the guards she had seen at the palace. She thought about the veteran who had educated Oliver about military service and tradition. She understood now that these weren't just ceremonies or traditions for their own sake, but ways of honoring real people who had made real sacrifices. The poppy pinned to her coat felt heavier with meaning than it had in previous years. After the official ceremony, there was a reception where military personnel and their families mixed with members of the royal family and government officials. Charlotte's parents had told her that Sergeant Mitchell would be there, and she was both nervous and excited about the possibility of meeting him in person. Her mother had reminded her to be natural and not to make too big a deal of it, as that might embarrass them both. When they finally met, it was a simple, genuine moment. Sergeant Mitchell was in his dress uniform, and when he was introduced to the royal family, Charlotte smiled at him with recognition. He bowed formally, as protocol required, but his eyes showed warmth and appreciation. They spoke briefly, with Charlotte thanking him again for his letter and his service. He told her that her courage had inspired many people, not just him. The meeting was photographed by official palace photographers, and the image of Charlotte speaking with Sergeant Mitchell became one of the defining pictures of that year's Remembrance Day. It captured something important about service, respect across generations, and the personal connections that could exist even within formal structures. The photo was widely shared, reminding people of the earlier incident and its ongoing significance. Oliver and his mother were watching the ceremony on television at home, as were millions of other people. When Oliver saw Charlotte speaking with the guard, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. He was happy to see that connection, proud of how much he had changed since that day and grateful for the lesson he had learned. His mother squeezed his hand, and they shared a look of understanding without needing to say anything. At school the following week, Oliver gave a presentation about Remembrance Day and what it meant to him. He spoke about his own experience of disrespecting a guard and how that had changed him. His classmates listened with interest, and many said afterward that his honesty made them think differently about the ceremony and about their own behavior. His teacher was impressed by his growth and maturity. Charlotte's school also had a Remembrance Day assembly, and while she wasn't singled out, her teacher did speak generally about the importance of respecting those in service and treating everyone with dignity. Several of Charlotte's classmates glanced at her during this part of the assembly. Recognizing the reference to her actions, she focused on the speaker, not wanting to draw attention to herself, but she felt proud of what she had done and its lasting impact. The incident had become part of educational curricula in various schools across the country. Teachers used it as a case study in citizenship education, character development, and conflict resolution. Exam boards even referenced it in sample questions about modern British society and values. What had started as a spontaneous moment had become an educational touchstone. Documentary filmmakers working on a series about modern Britain interviewed several people connected to the incident. They spoke with child psychologists about what made Charlotte's approach effective, with military historians about the role of ceremonial guards, and with educators about teaching respect and civic responsibility. The documentary included interviews with Sergeant Mitchell and, with their permission, with Oliver and his mother. Oliver's interview was particularly powerful. He spoke candidly about being that rude child, about not thinking of the guard as a real person, about his mother's distraction with her phone, and about how Charlotte's intervention had shocked him into awareness. He discussed his transformation and his new interests in military history and community service. His honesty and obvious growth made for compelling viewing. The documentary also explored broader themes that the incident had highlighted. It examined how parents balance supervision with allowing children independence, how social media and smartphones affect family dynamics, how society teaches respect for institutions and the people within them, and how royal family members navigate between public duty and private life. Charlotte's parents participated in a limited way with the documentary, speaking generally about their approach to raising their children and their emphasis on values like service, kindness, and courage. They didn't focus specifically on Charlotte, but rather on their overall parenting philosophy. They emphasized that they wanted their children to understand that being royal meant having opportunities to serve and help others, not just enjoying privileges. The anniversary of the incident arrived, and while it wasn't officially commemorated, many people marked it on social media. They shared the original videos again, discussed what they had learned from it, and reflected on how one child's courage had sparked so much positive change. Charlotte's parents chose not to make a big deal of the anniversary, not wanting Charlotte to feel pressure or excessive attention. However, Charlotte received cards and letters from around the world, sent by parents thanking her for providing such a positive example for their children, by teachers grateful for a real-world case study and good character, and by military service members appreciating her defense of one of their own. Each letter was reviewed by palace staff, and appropriate ones were shared with Charlotte. One letter came from a young girl in Canada who had been inspired by Charlotte's actions to stand up to a bully at her school. She wrote that she had been scared but remembered Charlotte's courage and found her own. The situation had been resolved peacefully, and the bully had apologized and changed their behavior. Charlotte read this letter several times, touched that her actions had helped someone she would never meet. Another letter came from an elderly woman in Scotland who had lost her husband, a military veteran, years before. She wrote that seeing Charlotte defend the guard had moved her to tears because it showed that younger generations still understood the importance of honoring service. She thanked Charlotte for keeping alive the values her husband had believed in and fought for. These letters and many others like them showed Charlotte that actions, even small ones, could ripple outward in ways she couldn't predict or control. Her parents used them as teaching moments, discussing with her the responsibility that came with her position and how she could use her platform to encourage positive change. They emphasized that she shouldn't feel burdened by this, but rather empowered. Sergeant Mitchell received a commendation that year, not specifically for the incident, but for his years of exemplary service. During the ceremony, his commanding officer made a brief reference to how Sergeant Mitchell had represented the Guards with distinction in both traditional duties and in moments that had captured public attention. Mitchell stood at attention, proud but humble, embodying the values the Guards represented. Oliver's transformation continued. He had maintained his interest in military history and had joined his school's cadet program. His mother reported that he was doing better academically and socially, and that the incident had been a real turning point for their family. She had become an advocate for mindful parenting, sharing her story at school meetings and parent groups, encouraging others to put down their phones and engage with their children. The incident had also influenced policy discussions. Some politicians referenced it when debating education reforms, particularly around character education and citizenship training. Others mentioned it in discussions about the role of the monarchy in modern Britain, arguing that moments like these showed the relevance and positive influence of the royal family. Tourism at royal sites had evolved too. More interpretive materials had been created to educate visitors about the Guards and their role, helping people understand that these were working soldiers, not just tourist attractions. Guards reported fewer incidents of harassment, and the atmosphere at ceremonies had become more respectful overall. While the improvement couldn't be entirely attributed to Charlotte's actions, they had certainly contributed to a cultural shift. Charlotte continued to grow and develop, attending school, participating in family activities, and gradually taking on age-appropriate public duties. The incident at the palace gates remained part of her story but didn't define her entirely. She was still a child, still learning and growing, still making mistakes and having triumphs like any other young person. yet the incident had marked her in important ways. It had shown her that she could make a difference, that her voice mattered, and that courage and kindness were powerful tools for positive change. It had connected her to people beyond her immediate circle and helped her understand the impact her position could have on others. 2 years after the incident at the palace gates, Charlotte was 10 years old and had grown considerably, not just physically, but in understanding and maturity. The event that had captured worldwide attention was no longer constantly in the media, but its effects continued to resonate through the lives it had touched and the broader cultural impact it had made. Charlotte rarely thought about that day anymore in an active way, but it had become part of who she was, influencing her decisions and reactions in subtle ways. When she saw someone being treated unfairly at school, she remembered the feeling of speaking up. When she felt nervous about public appearances, she recalled finding courage despite her fear. The incident had become a foundation stone in her developing character. Oliver, now 12, had flourished in ways his mother could hardly have imagined that day at the palace. He was excelling in the cadet program and had developed a particular interest in military history and international relations. His teachers noted his empathy and his willingness to help classmates who were struggling. He often volunteered to mentor younger students, sharing his own story of transformation when appropriate. His mother had written a book about their experience, not sensationalizing the incident, but using it as a starting point for discussions about mindful parenting, teaching respect and the importance of admitting mistakes and learning from them. The book had become popular among parenting groups, and she had been invited to speak at schools and community centers about the lessons she had learned. Sergeant Mitchell had been promoted and had moved into a training role, helping to prepare the next generation of Queen's Guards. He often shared the story with new recruits, not to embarrass them, but to remind them that their role was about real service to real people, and that sometimes that service was recognized in unexpected ways. He emphasized that how they conducted themselves mattered, even in moments when they thought no one was watching. The veteran who had educated Oliver that day had stayed in touch with the family through occasional emails. He had been invited to Oliver's school several more times to speak about military service and history. He found purpose in these educational visits, feeling that he was honoring the memory of his fellow service members by helping younger generations understand and appreciate their sacrifice. Charlotte's school had maintained the positive culture shift that her example had helped inspire. Teachers reported that students were more likely to stand up for each other and less likely to tolerate bullying. The school had implemented a peer mentoring program, and Charlotte had volunteered as a mentor for younger students, just as she had always participated in regular school activities alongside her classmates. During one mentoring session, a younger student asked Charlotte if the story about her and the guard was true. Charlotte confirmed it was, but emphasized that she had simply done what felt right, and that anyone could do the same when they saw something wrong happening. She told the child that being nervous about speaking up was normal, but that didn't mean you shouldn't do it anyway. The younger student, a 7-year-old girl named Emma, took Charlotte's words to heart. A few weeks later, Emma saw an older student taking a younger child's lunch money and stepped forward to tell a teacher. The situation was resolved, the bully received appropriate consequences and counseling, and the younger child got support. Emma told Charlotte about it afterward, crediting her for the inspiration, and Charlotte felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The cycle of positive influence continued to expand in ways no one could have fully predicted or measured. Teachers across the country still reference the incident when teaching about courage and citizenship. Parents still used it as an example when talking to their children about doing the right thing. Military personnel still appreciated it as a moment when their service had been publicly defended and honored. Charlotte's parents had watched her development with pride and relief. Raising children in the public eye was never easy, and they had worried about how media attention might affect her. But Charlotte had handled the experience with remarkable grace, neither becoming arrogant about the praise she received, nor being crushed by the weight of expectations. She remained grounded, thanks in part to her parents' consistent efforts to treat all 3 of their children as normally as possible. Her siblings had also grown. George, preparing for his eventual role as king, had learned from Charlotte's example about the importance of using his position for good. Louis, naturally more outgoing and impulsive, had learned about thinking before acting. The 3 maintained a close relationship, supporting each other through the unique challenges of growing up royal in the modern world. The Queen, now in her late 90s, had lived to see her great-granddaughter embody values she held dear. In one of her final conversations with Charlotte before her health declined, she told the young princess that she had done something remarkable by showing that royalty was about character and service, not just titles and tradition. Charlotte treasured that conversation, not fully understanding its significance until later. When the Queen eventually passed away, as all people must, Charlotte found herself thinking about that conversation during the mourning period. She attended the funeral and the various ceremonies with her family, and she thought about legacy and duty and how one person's life could influence so many others. She understood more clearly why that moment at the palace gates had mattered so much to her great-grandmother. Oliver and his mother watched the funeral on television, and Oliver felt a personal sense of loss despite never having met the Queen. He had come to understand what the monarchy represented, at least in part, through his own experience with Charlotte. He wrote a letter of condolence to the royal family, expressing his sympathy and sharing what the Queen's great-granddaughter had meant to his own life. As Charlotte entered her teenage years, the incident remained part of public memory, but had faded from constant discussion. New royal moments captured attention, other events filled the news cycle, and life moved forward as it always does. Yet the incident had permanently influenced many lives, and had contributed to subtle but real cultural shifts around respect, courage, and kindness. Charlotte occasionally gave interviews as she got older and took on more public duties. When asked about that day at the palace gates, she spoke about it with perspective and maturity. She acknowledged that she had been nervous and hadn't been certain what would happen, but that staying silent when someone was being wronged had felt worse than the fear of speaking up. She hoped others would find their own courage in similar situations. Sergeant Mitchell retired from active service with full honors after a distinguished career. At his retirement ceremony, several people mentioned the incident with Charlotte, noting that it had become part of military lore, a reminder that their service mattered and was appreciated. He gave a brief speech thanking everyone he had served with and acknowledging that sometimes the most meaningful moments come from unexpected places. Oliver attended university, choosing to study international relations with a focus on military history and diplomacy. He had transformed completely from that rude child at the palace gates into a thoughtful young man, dedicated to public service. He volunteered with veteran organizations and youth mentoring programs, always crediting that moment of correction and the grace with which it was delivered as the turning point in his life. His mother remained active in parenting education, and her book had been updated with a new chapter reflecting on the long-term changes in their family. She remained grateful for Charlotte's intervention and for the lesson both she and her son had needed. She often said that sometimes the best thing that could happen was to be called out when you were wrong, provided it was done with kindness and a genuine desire to help, rather than simply to condemn. The veteran who had educated Oliver that day lived to see the boy become a young man dedicated to honoring military service. They exchanged Christmas cards each year, and Oliver visited him occasionally to update him on his progress and to seek advice. The veteran felt that his own service had come full circle, that defending his country had led to this connection that allowed him to educate future generations about why that service mattered. Charlotte's path continued to unfold, shaped by many experiences and influences, but that moment at the palace gates remained foundational. It had taught her that her voice mattered, that kindness and courage could coexist, and that doing the right thing often had ripple effects far beyond what could be anticipated. These lessons served her well as she navigated the complexities of royal life and public service. The story of that day had become something larger than the individuals involved. It had become a parable about courage, redemption, kindness, and the power of standing up for what is right. It was referenced in books, taught in schools, discussed in families, and remembered by those who had witnessed it or heard about it. The specific details might fade over time, but the core message remained relevant and powerful. As Charlotte approached adulthood, she understood more fully what had happened that day and why it had resonated with so many people. It wasn't just about a princess defending a guard or a rude child being corrected. It was about human connection, about recognizing the humanity in everyone, or